Okay. Yay, we're live. So good evening. Happy February 9th. I was going to do Jan Edwards with Paving the Way Foundation, and we were going to do our Facebook Live next Thursday, but I have an event next Thursday and a Thursday after that. So I was like, well, we're just going to do it early in the month because it's Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and we're coming right off of Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So I thought, let's do a little earlier rather than later to keep this information fresh out in your mind. So this evening, I have an extraordinary guest, Randy Schneider. Randy is a former detective. He worked with ICAC. I'm going to let him share way more about his past and his present and his hopeful future in the world of protecting our kids and keeping them safe online. So, Randy, welcome. Thanks for being with me tonight. I so appreciate you taking the time out to hang with me. And we get to see each other tomorrow night at Night of Hope in Phoenix. I can't believe this time tomorrow night I'll be there. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and you're coming at a great time. The weather's nice. It ought to be a really beautiful evening for the event, and so I'm very thankful that they're not having it in mid-July.
You and me both, my friend. You and me both. So why don't you share a little bit about who you are, what you're up to, or really your history is what makes you super unique, and then really what you're doing with that history to continue to make a difference for our kids.
Absolutely. So I've been with the Pinal County Sheriff's Office for a little over 22 years now. Started out doing, basic stuff patrol. I promoted up into corporal, and I knew that before I went any higher up the ranks that I wanted to get into investigations. And so right about the 10-year mark of my career, I went into investigations, and the unit that I was immediately placed into is called Persons Crimes, which handles pretty much everything that one person can do to another to hurt them outside of an actual homicide.
Wow.
But the bulk of our traffic is child crimes. There's a fair amount of adult crime out there, but most of the time patrol feels equipped to be able to handle that. And child crimes are different. We have to deal with the collection of evidence differently. We have to deal with interviewing the victims differently. And so really a lot of what we deal with was child crimes.
Right.
And a couple of years into that, our forensic examiner came to us, our computer forensic examiner came to me and said, hey, I've got an internet crimes case. I want you to go ahead and take it. And so I started working some internet crimes, and that kind of led down the rabbit hole, so to speak, looking at child exploitation and human trafficking and all of those kinds of aspects that are becoming more and more prevalent online as the internet has exploded and social media has exploded. And so I spent the last 6 years of my career working internet crimes against children almost exclusively. Wow. And spent part of that time doing reactive casework, things that were coming from the National Center, things that were coming in through patrol. And then the other half was all proactive. I got to go online as an undercover and pretend to either be the bad parent that was trying to coordinate with other bad parents, or more often and alternatively, I was the kid, and I put myself out there as a teenager trying to hope that the bad guys would find me before they found an actual kid,
Right.
To be able to, to protect those children. And it was an amazing time. It was really interesting. The way that the investigations go and the different ways that you have to dig out the information and also be able to locate the evidence. And so when I was preparing to retire the first time,
well, and I want to back up 1 second, right? You said reactive versus proactive, and I got what the proactive was. You were pretending to be someone you weren't to hopefully catch
right.
the bad actors. Talk to me about reactive. Explain what reactive is, because this is really, really, I think, really important.
And reactive is kind of the meat and potatoes of what most investigators do when it comes to this. There's two different ways that it comes at us primarily. One of them is through calls for service. When a parent or a teacher or a caregiver finds out that their child is either being victimized or at risk of being victimized, they call 911 or they call their local
Right.
agency and they say, hey, here's what's going on. And a patrol officer goes out, collects the basic information, and then sends it up for us to do additional investigation. And so in those cases, we may have a parent who tripped across explicit images on their child's device, or found out that there was some communications going on between their child and an adult that
Right.
were inappropriate. And so they want that investigated. And kind of the fallacy of the mindset that I hear from most parents is, oh, well, this perpetrator is in another state or in another country, so there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm.
I made cases in 33 states and 8 foreign countries. Trust me, we can do something about it.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and
Wow,
so,
Randy.
yeah, and it's one of those things where people think that our jurisdictional boundaries are at the city limits or at the county line or the state line, but there are national and international partnerships that have been created because the internet is worldwide,
Right.
and it allows us to be able to go after perpetrators all around the world and to rescue kids from all around the world. And so we have that going for us to be able to do those investigations. And a lot of parents and a lot of caregivers don't understand that.
Right.
Um, the other thing that we have is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they are they're the national clearinghouse for all electronic service providers across the country. If they come across anything that they find on their site or on their platform that is exploitation of children, they're mandated by federal law to report that to the National Center. So if there's an image that goes across Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or any of those, it's going to get reported to the National Center. That then gets disseminated out to the 61 Internet Crimes Against Children task forces around the country, and that eventually filters back to those of us that do internet crimes.
Right.
Uh,
So let's back up to what is an ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children? What is that? What do they do? And why is it so important that we have it?
Well, the important thing about the ICAC units is that it takes these partnerships, it takes the local agencies and local investigators, oftentimes collaborating with state level investigators, either from a state policing agency or an attorney general's office, and collaborate along with the FBI, with Homeland Security, to be able to have a global impact on these types of crimes. And so 61 different task forces have been set up across the 50 states. And each of those is a combination of state, local, and federal authorities that receive all of these cyber tips coming into the National Center about all of these crimes going on the different platforms, on online services, and they're tasked with conducting those investigations. That way, it's not falling to Joe Patrol officer who
Right.
happens to, spend more time writing tickets or eating donuts than he does looking at the internet. And it puts it in the
Hey
hands of
now, hey
special
now, hey
people.
now. Hey now. We might
As,
have some. I've got lots of Leo buddies. No insulting Leo.
as a professional donut eater, okay, you know, trust me, I love the power rings as much as anybody, but
Yes.
it takes a certain amount of expertise to be able to conduct these investigations
Right.
because of the
And
technological knowledge.
right, I'm going to interrupt you. And most of them don't really know.
Mhm.
Right? Because I've had so many parents, Jan, what do I do? I'm like, first thing, call Nick Mick, let Nick Mick know what's happening. Second thing, you got to call local law enforcement. And of course, we have Florida Department of Children and Family Services, right? So in all those three calls need to be made ASAP, right? Florida Department, Nick Mick, and your local law enforcement. And I had an intern. She's from out of the country. One of her really good friends from the same country is up in the north Midwest, up in the North Midwest, and on a college scholarship. And he gets this threatening text about, "I've got your nudes, I've got your pictures, and if you don't pay me, I'm going to send them." And this kid's like, "I've not sent any nudes to anybody," and he was totally freaked out.
Right.
Called her, She was freaked out. She just started interning with us. She's like, Miss Jan, what do I do? 4 months from now, she'll know exactly what to do. Well, she knows now. And I gave her step by step by step. And they said when they called the local law enforcement officers, they're like, well, we really can't do anything.
And sadly, a lot of local agencies have not received the education to do that. And that's why I always tell people, if you hit that wall with your local agency, if you call 911 and they say, sorry, we can't help you, reach out to the National Center. Submit your own cyber tip through the National Center's
Right.
website, through missingkids.org, because that will eventually filter to the right person. That will filter to the individual who has the expertise to conduct that investigation,
Right.
and they are able to help you. I was at an event with my sheriff not 2 months ago, and he received a phone call in the middle of the event. And he goes, hold on a minute. I got Randy right here. I'm handing you the phone.
Right.
Hands it over to him. One of his friends, one of the people that they know, their child was being sextorted. And that's what we call that, where the offenders are trying to get either money or additional exploitive images from that child. Their child was being sextorted. And
yeah, well, hang on. Let's break that down a little bit, because I was at family services training today, right? I went in and worked with family services stakes. So we're going to go in and work with their kiddos, and you want to have the staff trained first. A lot of what I shared was new information for them.
Right.
They had a sense of what sexting was, sextortion, and the level and how much it's grown was new. The doxing, no one had really ever heard of doxing, right? Which mostly happens to adults, but we talked about that. It's a similar form of sextortion, but a little bit higher level, because when you're a grown up, you have cash,
right.
So there's an awareness that needs to be made for our adults, all adults, to really fully understand what sextortion is and how it happens. So can you kind of break that down for us?
Sextortion is taking a vulnerable person and using extortionate means or blackmail to obtain extortion or exploitive images, and oftentimes holding those hostage either to increase additional production of those exploitive images or to obtain some sort of money or monetary value. Case in point, I had a victim here in Arizona. She had been sextorted for about 9 months or so. And it started out very innocently. Some guy hit her up on Facebook. They started chatting. He seemed like a nice guy. During the course of the time that they were chatting, he was able to kind of convince her to give. It was not an appropriate picture, but it was not anything horribly risque. It was enough, however, that he was able to sink the hook and say when he had that, now you're going to send me what I want, when I want, how I want, and when I tell you to do it, or I'm going to release this to your principal, I'm going to release this to your parents, I'm going to release this to your pastor and everybody in your school. And he had enough information to do exactly that. And she felt so horribly trapped by that she gave in, and she allowed him to control her body for the next several months until she literally got to the point where she was prepared to commit suicide. Wow. Because she couldn't handle the stress of it anymore, and she didn't want to think about how it would ruin her life if those images were released to the public. Right. Fortunately, she was a very strong young woman. She went to her mother, said, Mom, this is what's going on. Mom immediately contacted the FBI. I was on the federal task force at the time, so I was working in the FBI building. The FBI agent got it, walked it over to me, and said, hey, man, this one's in your city. Go get it. And when we located the perpetrator, he was in Canada and had approximately 20 other victims that he had done the same thing to across the U.S. and Canada. One of them was as young as 12.
Wow.
And he had forced these people to, take all of these horrific exploitive images and videos for his own gratification. And, the really scary thing is um, n- only one of the other victims out of all of them that had reported, or out of all of them that had been victimized, rather, had reported. And so, had this young girl not done that, likely she could have harmed herself, but
Absolutely.
we wouldn't have had the information that we needed to go after him and to rescue all of those other people who were in that same boat. And
Right.
people think that this is a primarily female victim kind of crime. The number one growing internet crime right now is sextortion, and it's for males between the ages of 10 and 17, because that demographic is online. They're already, a little bit, not using their brain for all
Well,
play.
to be fair, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed,
Right,
right? And the other piece too is we're not talking about this. By the
right.
way, Tammy Tommy Butler says hi.
Hi, Tammy.
And so we're not talking about this. So our young men don't know.
Right,
They don't know they're being that what is happening is illegal
right.
to them. They don't know. Oh, it's Fran. Sorry, it's Fran. Um, so that's the thing. They have no idea this is happening. They're curious.
Right.
They're walking hormones with arms and legs,
And
right?
a lot of these perpetrators are very good at catfishing. They
Yes.
will they will become that ideal 14, 15, 16-year-old female that this kid is looking for, and will use that to infiltrate and to obtain what they want, and it's all 100% a lie.
Yes.
And so you get a lot of kids nowadays um, ending up as victims of these extortion schemes or sextortion schemes that don't don't know what they're doing and getting into.
Yes. Yeah. And because we don't talk about it, it's uncomfortable.
Right,
Parents don't know about it. So they don't even know how to have the conversation with their kids. And then we've got, walking hormones. The wind blows and something happens, and they're like, "Ooh, what's that?" And then all of a sudden, this
right,
beautiful girl in air quotes, because we both know it's not a beautiful girl. It's a criminal organization overseas
right,
sending a picture. And because you've got adults engaging with children, who's going to win that conversation? One of my favorite examples to use. I'm going to have to find a new tennis star, but everybody knows who Serena Williams is, right? And we mostly go into Title I school, so they know who Serena Williams is. They don't really know what the U.S. Open is, but once I explain it, they get the context. I'm like, let's pretend we're all going to the U.S. Open, right? We're right there, center court, and they make sure no one's a tennis player or professional tennis, right? And I'm like, and she says, and I'll point to one of the kids. I'm like, hey, come on down and play tennis with me. Play against me. Like, who's going to win that game?
right.
Now, it's funny because I when we go into the boys and girls clubs, we separate the boys and the girls, and I mostly work with the boys. Of course, the boys go, I will, right? I'm like, dude, her serve's 100 miles an hour.
Right.
Not going to happen. And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And everybody's like, she will. I said, why? Because she's a professional tennis player. She's been playing tennis for almost her entire life. She's got this game down. Now let's put that over to social media.
Right.
You've got a 45, 50-year-old adult engaging with a 12, 13, 14-year-old brain. Who's going to win that game?
Right. All day long. And
Mhm.
you make a good point about it being an international ring or something like that,
Right.
but oftentimes it's not. That we also see a significant amount of it that is just your local creep or your quasi local creep, I would say, because
Right.
I had one individual that was down here in Arizona. We found out about him because he tried to sextort or successfully sextorted one and tried to sextort a second in New South Wales, Australia. And
Wow.
Australia received enough information that they could put us to hit our jurisdiction. And I continued with the investigation. I went and found the suspect. When we went through his forensics on his phone, I was able to identify about another 25 victims that he had around the U.S. and England, and there were about 60 more victims I wasn't able to positively identify. This was an 18-year-old kid who was talking to girls between the ages of about 9 and 17 and able to either threaten or coax them into providing those exploitive images that he then used to extort more and more. And there
Right.
were victims here in Arizona, there were victims in California, there were victims in Ohio and New York. I mean, and this kid, because Snapchat is so prevalent, had
Mhm.
no problem meeting people on
Mhm.
Snapchat, pretending to be their age, pretending to be their friend, and victimizing them left and right.
Right. So, did you do any of the interviewing of the young people?
I did.
Forensic
So
interviews?
I got qualified as a forensic interviewer back in 2010, and so when I was working primarily the hands-on child crimes, I was a forensic interviewer for that. Once I moved into internet crimes, it was a little bit more difficult because not all of our victims were local. Oftentimes
Right.
our suspects were local, but our victims were somewhere else. But if we had a local victim, um, sometimes we would interview them. Sometimes we'd take them to an advocacy center just
Sure.
to make sure that the interview was 100% clean.
Right, I get it. I totally get it. So, we were talking about the ways that these, cyber creeps, organized crime units, the people that really go after target our kids. Is there any common thread to what had them experience that kind of connection, or why they went ahead and sent that picture, even though somewhere in their gut they had a sense, but they went ahead and did it anyway? Is there any common thread or common theme in any of those reasons why our kids are doing this?
They're minors. I mean, honestly, it comes down to they are not experienced and they are very trusting.
Mhm.
Even the ones who have been through horrible things and have put up boundaries and borders and things like that, they're still trusting and they're looking for something, whether it be acceptance, whether it be love, whether it
Mhm.
be um, just that right connection with somebody that they think is a good friend or a confidant. And these predators are very good at sniffing out what
Yes.
does that kid need? Does that kid need somebody to say, "Yep, you're the
Mhm.
bomb, and you know it, and I'm going to keep telling you you're the bomb so that we can connect"? Or is this offender going to say, "Yeah, I know you're a little bit lower self-esteem, excuse me, self-esteemed, and so I'm going to help build up your self-esteem"? Or I know you
Right.
don't have a father figure. I'm going to fill in. These predators know what these kids need and are very good at sniffing it out and providing it. And the only commonality that I found was they're kids that want something or need something or have some vulnerability uh,
Right.
that these predators will exploit.
Right. There's a when we, go into Boys and Girls Club, we show a short little film called I Am Little Red, and we talk about vulnerabilities beforehand. We talk about the types of vulnerabilities. So, besides being a minor, that's a given. That's a vulnerability right there, your age. And it's funny because that's the last thing they mention. They'll be like, "Oh, yeah, my sibling or where I live or, whatever," and I wait. I'm like, "How about how old you are?"
Mhm.
And it doesn't occur for them that that makes them vulnerable. It's
Right.
really interesting. So, we have a variety of types of people that watch our parent tech talks. It's designed for parents and adults and guardians. And I know there's a lot of parents that will plop their kids right in front of it and go, "Hi, we're going to watch this together or grab some popcorn." Okay. So, if you were speaking to a teen, what are some things that you would share with them to look out for?
The first thing that I'll say is no adult should ever ask you to keep a secret, especially from your parents or a loved one. Now, I know that if I take my kids shopping so that we can buy my wife a birthday present or a Christmas present or something like that, or if my mother-in-law takes them shopping, that's that's a secret that's an okay secret.
Right, it's a
Anything
surprise birthday party. Yeah.
right. But any other kind of surprise, any other kind of secret that an adult is wanting a kid to keep, like, don't tell your parents about me, don't tell your parents about this, don't tell
Right.
your, we need to keep this relationship secret. That should be red flags. That should be big red flags, because there's no reason for an adult to ask a kid to keep a secret
Right.
about their communication or their relationship or their interactions. And then the second thing that I try to tell every kid, because I've gone out to schools, to churches, to youth groups, to you name it, and put these talks on not only for the parents but for the kids as well, and said, look, don't ever take a picture that you wouldn't be proud to show your principal, to show your grandmother, to show your, your pastor or your something like that, because anybody that asks you to take a picture that you couldn't easily, quickly, and willingly show to your parent is a picture you shouldn't take. And if somebody's asking you to take that, that's another big red flag.
Mm-hmm.
It's really scary that I want to say the statistic that I saw most recently was something like 40% of teenagers believe that sexting is a necessary or normal part of a relationship.
Yes.
And it's not. There's nothing okay about it. There's nothing normal about it. And it's something that can get kids into a lot of trouble, even if they think they're just sending it over to Mr. or Mrs. Right Now. We all know that those high school relationships, 99 times out of 100, are done in a week, 2 weeks, a month.
If that.
Right. And so Mr. Right Now may want that picture of you, but you have no control over what Mr. Right Now does with that as soon as you break up, or even as soon as you hit send. And that's where the danger comes in. And so if you don't want that picture to go to everybody, don't even take it.
Right. And, sorry, it was really brilliant to it. It's interesting because when we talk to the kids, we ask them, like, how many of you have younger siblings? About 3/4 of them raise their hand. Some will be like, I am the younger sibling. I'm like, ooh, lucky you. Right. And I'm like, okay, let's just, for a second, let's just picture that younger sibling's inappropriate picture on one of your buddy's phones. Is that okay?
Yeah,
and it washes over them how wrong it is when they know the person.
Right. The other thing that a lot of kids don't realize is when taking pictures, even if it's a completely innocent picture, many of the applications that are out there will geotag that image.
Yes.
So it will put the latitude and longitude of where that photo was taken. And there are commercially available, actually free applications that you can get online to be able to pull that metadata out of that image and drop a pin on a Google map to know where that person is. And I tell same thing, if you have younger siblings and you send that picture to, Joe Creepy that wants to exploit you, and it's got that geolocation information in there, how are you going to feel when he comes to come and snatch you up and finds your little brother or little sister in the yard instead and decides any port in the storm, one's as good as the other. And now your sibling is being abused. Now your sibling is missing because you sent a picture from your house that you didn't know who it was going to or how it was going to be used or controlled.
And there's currently there's a new TikTok rage to have a picture, this is where I live and my best friend lives here, to show the distance between you and your best friend. And you're supposed to take a picture in front of your house with the address.
I wonder
you
what.
And I both know that was started.
What registry number? Yeah,
that was started by a creeper.
Oh, absolutely. That is a trend specifically designed to gain the information that they need to go out and abduct children or exploit children or abuse children all day long.
Yep. Yeah. And I was like, the Tide Pod, that children died.
Right.
The cinnamon,
Mhm.
And it's anything to get a like or a love or a share or a comment. And I was working with some friends last year over it's called Startup Weekend, where you can bring any idea to your community and the community votes, and then you have to have that fully executed idea in 54 hours. It's every young person should do this. It's in every adult, because it's a really great way to get your brain firing to how to solve a problem quickly.
Right.
And the app that we worked on was to help kids determine like what their future could be. Because I'm sorry, at 18, you expect me to declare a major in college. I'm lucky to get dressed and be able to boil water and make oatmeal in the morning. And you want me
Right.
to decide my future? No. And so we were doing research for this app, and part of the research was crazy. 34% of the kids, they want to be an influencer.
Right.
They
And
don't know what that means.
yeah,
They
what
don't
even is
really even know what that means.
I was influenced by Star Wars. I'd love to be Darth Vader, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I don't understand where that,
Right.
where does that become an influence, and why are you able to use that as a career choice? And like you said, at 18, they barely know how to boil water. I'm 45. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, other than old. I mean, I'd like to be old when I grow up, but
Right.
you can't expect that, but you can expect that with the right communications, with the right conversations, starting at the young age, because more and more kids are getting smartphones and
Mhm.
tablets. I think they said the average age of a kid getting an iPhone now is 10.
Yeah.
Um, you have to have those conversations early. And yes, it's uncomfortable. I worked in sex crimes for 10 years. I didn't want to have a birds and bees conversation with my kids, but it had to
Exactly.
be done because it was necessary to make sure that they were going to be safe. And so it was integrated into the how to be safe online.
Mhm.
And one thing that I tell parents all the time is you would never give a 10-year-old a loaded gun without any training at all and say, "Here you go, make good choices."
Yes.
They're not going to do it. They can't.
No, they're
They don't
not.
know
They
how.
can't. They can't.
And
And yet
yet,
we expect them to.
right. And yet you hand them a cell phone or a tablet that has access to everything in the world and every creep out there that wants to find a kid and say, use good choices.
Yeah.
And not talk about what those good choices are and should be, and how to make them. And
Well, and parents don't really know either, because look, we didn't grow up with this thing.
right,
I'm going to age myself here, but I had like one of the first cell phones in Phoenix, oh, so long ago in a land far, far away, and it was about as big as your shoe.
right.
We had pagers. We
Yep.
had, then we got to flip phones, and so for really anyone, quite frankly, 40 and older, really,
Yeah.
45 probably, but 40 and older, we didn't have this stuff growing up.
Right.
It takes 36 screens to get to parental controls for Xbox. Unless you've got a PhD in Xbox, there's no way as a parent am I going to get there.
Right.
It's no
and,
way.
and yet it's there are so many steps to turn on parental controls, and yet it takes one click for a child to find exploitive images or find pornographic images online. It takes absolutely no effort at all. And how much effort does it take to get past the "Are you 18" screen on
Oh,
if
yeah.
the you know
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's just like every college kid. Sure, I'm 21. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Right. Let me show you my fake ID.
Right, right. You know, and
Not that
so
I ever did that. Drinking age was 18.
hypothetically speaking, I've heard that people may have
Yes.
done that at times. Um,
Right. Yeah, that
but
shows my age. Yeah, drinking age was 18.
but and so we give these devices to these kids, expecting them to
Yeah,
understand and act in ways that many adults can't.
correct.
And how is it? How do we have that expectation, and then we're surprised when our kid gets victimized? And I think the biggest fallacy is most parents say, "Well, it's not going to be my kid. My
Right.
kid wouldn't do that."
Right.
And I bet every one of those parents who says, my kid wouldn't do that, had a parent that said, my kid won't do that. And they went out and did it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, the reason why predators go after teenagers is because we're wired and designed to push back on everything.
Right.
And we're wired and designed to be curious and to try and learn things. So our prefrontal cortex starts to fill up and catch up with all the other things that our amygdala does and our midbrain and all of that. And there's a couple of pieces of legislation that are being introduced at the federal level. So I'd love to get your input on this, which is I think it was Senator Stewart and Rep. Hawley have both introduced a piece of legislation that will make 16 the minimum age to be able to participate on any social media app, because you can age verify at 16.
Right.
And over here, I'm like, yeah. Right. And you've got kids going, but, and then you've got parents going, but, because, it's going to create some havoc for sure. But I would love to get your input. Look, the Surgeon General just came out with said 13 years old. It's too young. It's just too young. It's doing damage to their brain. Our kids have access to pornography in 2 clicks. 8-year-old kid types in girl. The next thing you know, you got nude girl. And the next thing you know, you got Pornhub.
Right. I made the mistake of trying to shop for my wife.
Yeah.
We were going to go on a cruise to the Bahamas, and I made the mistake of thinking, oh, I'll go on and surprise her with a new bikini. Yeah, don't use that search term.
No,
it does not come up with swimsuits, at least not exclusively. And so that's part of the problem is the big tech giants need to make it less intuitive to be able to find that sort of thing. It really needs to have additional layers to be able to find it. But on the flip side of that, parents need to consider what message they're sending, because like I know a number of parents who, instead of using the text functionality that's built into their phone to communicate with their kids, they communicate on Snapchat. Now, if you're allowing your child to have Snapchat to be able to communicate back and forth with you, they're using it to communicate with everybody else too.
Yep.
And that's where the danger lies. So if you as a parent are condoning that at whatever age, you're contributing to the problem. And I think that it's going to take educating parents that, look, just because you use Snapchat to communicate with somebody doesn't make it appropriate for your kids, especially when you have functionality like for my eyes only. Right. And you don't have parents that are going in and checking, what are my kids doing? Are they being smart about it? Are they being safe with it? Are they doing things that they're not supposed to do? And I've come across so many parents that say, well, I don't check my kid's phone. It's a violation of their privacy.
No, it is not. You pay the phone bill.
Exactly.
And you're the parent. I was talking to another friend of mine about runaways. And he goes, a child can't consent to run away because they're under 18. I was like, I'd never thought of that before.
Right.
We have the age, I think it should be a little higher, but we have the age of adulthood at 18. Our brains aren't developed yet. We still got another 6 to 10 years before that actually happens. So what do you think? What do you think about the age of 16 being that's where you can start to interact with social media or chat features?
I think it's a great start that is going to be largely ceremonial, because I think that enforcement of that is going to be almost impossible, if not non-existent, especially when you have the parents that are condoning it. My youngest is 12. She wants social media. She's been told no. And I get to fall back on not only, my career, but it's against the federal law. You can't have it, which only gets to be used for one more year. And then I just have to be the mean dad. But with my older daughter, who's 14, she is of legal age to use it. And what it comes down to is Um, I pounded it into her head for years and years and years because she's grown up with me working internet crimes, what the dangers are, how to be safe, what the safety mechanisms are that should be in place, what to do, what not to do. And she's actually has had the maturity when attempts have been made to try and take her down that dark path, um,
Mhm.
to not do anything and to come and report it to us and to let us know. And she even toward the end of my career called me at work one day and said, "Daddy, my friend needs your help because she's being exploited."
Mhm. Mm.
And so but at the same time, um, so many of her friends' parents use Snapchat as a communications tool. Allow the kids to have whatever apps on. Don't ever check anything. Don't have those conversations. And so you can have federal legislation that says you have to be 16 before you get onto social media.
Right.
Who's going to enforce that and how? What's the penalty? What's the consequence?
Yes. Those are great questions, Randy. Really great questions. And I think, one of our, do you know Dan Nash? You
Mm,
need to know Dan Nash. He and Allison Phillips, they run the Human Trafficking Training Institute, and they train Leo. That's the whole.
Allison, I'm familiar with. Dan wasn't
They
wasn't.
train law enforcement, and he's like, you want to keep your kids safe? Don't give them a phone.
Mhm.
He's like, plain and simple, just
Yep.
don't give them a phone.
And here's the
And
really scary part about that
yeah,
idea, though. I remember when my son was in high school, and this is going back. He's almost 20 now, so this was 7 years ago. First day of high school, he goes in and he comes home and he goes, "Dad, I need a smartphone." I said, "No, you don't. You've got a flip phone. That's plenty. It makes phone calls. It sends text messages. You're good." And he goes, "No." Sitting in class, when somebody asked my teacher a question, she said, "Well, you can Google that." And half the class pulls out their phone and starts Googling. And that's how they are being taught. That's what the
interesting.
teachers are teaching them.
Wow.
Is use your smartphone to Google the information or to look up what you need. And after that, the teachers started assigning assignments that necessitated access to the internet from a smartphone, from a smart device, to be able to do the assignment because it was something that was due in class. They couldn't come home and do it,
Right.
and you had to have the device to be able to do it. And so we're right back to what example are we setting for our kids when we are saying you really don't need a smartphone? It's not safe for you to have because your
Mhm.
brain's not developed.
Right.
Oh, yeah, by the way, you need it for this. You
Yeah,
need it.
it's really interesting you say that because Gab has a new phone and Bark, Gab's had a phone out for a while and Bark now has a new phone. And they look like smartphones, but they don't have access to the internet.
Right.
And I get sending kids to using Google to look stuff up. Great. And I want you to do the thinking.
Hmm.
Let's look at it together. Let's do the thinking and
Right.
see what we can come up with. And that I think the critical thinking, which is what has our children, I believe, be more vulnerable. I think something I would suggest and invite parents to take on is start doing critical thinking, exercises with your kids.
Right.
Pose some sort of situation and be like, okay, let's walk through it. What would you do?
Right.
And
Using
have them, yeah, and have them use all of their brain.
right. And and it comes down to my son the same thing. He would be doing some homework and he'd say, "Dad, how do you spell this?" And I'd say, "See that thing over there? That's a bookshelf. On the second shelf, there's a thing called a dictionary." And he'd go, "Nah," and he'd grab his phone. "Hey Siri, how do you spell?" And Siri would tell him. And I
Mhm.
hate that Siri person.
No, I would do the
We're
same
live.
thing
I
to
have
my
to watch
daughter.
my language.
Yeah, I would do the same thing to my daughter. She'd be like, "Mom, how do you spell?" I'm like, "Sweet pea, I love you. I need you to do the thinking."
Right.
"But mom," I'm like, "No, really, sweetheart, do the thinking. I know, right? I know you want it now, and I need you to do the thinking." I actually rewarded her once when she came home from school. They had done a whole lesson on chores, and she came home. She said, "Mom, I do 9 out of the 10 chores that we talked about today. The only thing I don't do is mow the lawn. I believe I deserve a raise. Now, I said, "Sweetheart," I go, "I'm gonna give you a raise, not because you deserve it or earn it because you do all the chores, but because you actually did the thinking. You came up with a viable reason why. You presented it succinctly. You weren't demanding or whiny."
Right.
I go, "That's what I'm rewarding, not the fact that you're part of a family and we're doing chores."
Right.
Right? But that's missing for our children today, which is one of the things I believe has them so vulnerable,
Right.
is that the thinking of stuff is missing. And there's it's probably been out for what, 6 weeks, the chat GPT.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, part of me says I wish it was around when I was in high school or even in,
Right.
but at the same time, it's terrifying because all it's doing is convincing our kids that they don't need to think. That
Yeah.
there's an AI out there that can think for them. There's a program or an app that can do it for them, and we're slowly but surely convincing our kids that they can be easily replaced by technology.
Mhm.
And what are we going to do when all of our kids? It reminds me of that cartoon Wall-E, because if you remember
Yes.
Wall-E, the whole humanity is on this ship and they've gone out to space and they're on year 500 of a 7-year cruise, and
Right.
all of them, all they know how to do is sit there and watch their VR helmet and zone out to life, and they don't have a clue. They don't know how to walk, they don't know how to
Mhm.
feed themselves, they don't know how to nothing. And that's
No.
what we're moving toward. And it's
It's
terrifying.
very scary. It's very scary. I feel like I'm in The Matrix,
Mhm.
Total Recall, and Terminator right now.
I would throw in Idiocracy, and if you haven't seen that, I highly
Oh.
recommend it. It is a horrible movie that makes a great point.
Okay. A horrible movie that makes a great point. All
It,
right,
it would it would
Idiocracy.
it will never win an Oscar, or it may get a Rotten Tomato, but it's about two idiots that get accidentally frozen and thawed out 100 years later, and what they've realized is humanity's intelligence level has decreased so significantly because stupid people breed faster than smart people, and smart people don't take the time to educate the way that they used to. And so now these two that were minimally educated in their time frame are now the smartest people on the planet.
Wow.
And it's terrifying because, well, the president of the United States is an ex-wrestler, which I won't go there, but they have they're trying to water their plants and their fields with Gatorade because, well, Gatorade has electrolytes and electrolytes are good for you.
Okay.
And it's a horrible
Wow.
movie, but it makes a
Yeah,
really good
yeah.
point to how are we dumbing down society? How are we letting so much technology do all of our thinking for us, do all of our learning for us, do our writing for us, do our spelling and everything else for us? And
Yeah.
I see it reflected now. I do background investigations for the sheriff's office,
Mm.
and I'm getting these students that are these applicants that are coming in that are 20, 21 years old. They've never seen the 1900s. They think that anybody that is pre-Google must be some sort of you know uh, dinosaur.
Dinosaur. Yeah.
And they can't spell, they can't write, they are minimal in their mathematics skills,
Mhm.
they don't know how to interview or how to articulate themselves because they've had it all done for them. They have
Yeah.
spell check on Word. They can go to Grammarly and have Grammarly do everything for them. Heck, I had college students when I was teaching at ASU that were paying services to write their term papers for them because they didn't want to learn the material or hadn't learned the material, and it was easier.
Wow. Wow. So I'm going to stop, change, start another conversation because we don't see how quick this goes.
It
Only
does.
11 minutes left. So you just finished your book.
I did.
Cyber Creeks. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about that book and like what the context was, and then I'll put the website up where people can grab it.
So during the course of my time, particularly in internet crimes, I had some cases that were just absolute characters. The I couldn't have made that up if I had that good an imagination. And when I was getting ready to retire, I had so many people that I worked with going, "Oh man, you should go write a book about that. That was the craziest situation." Or I remember that suspect. He was such a creep. Da 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 da. And I after I retired and failed at retirement and went back, I had a lot of spare
Times
time.
way too young, Randy. I don't know what you were thinking.
Honestly, I was thinking 10 years of this is enough. It's killing my brain.
Yes.
And so I was eligible for retirement through our pension system, so I took it.
Right.
But there were so many experiences that I had that I could use as good teaching moments that I thought, I'm going to write this and I'm going to talk about the cases that I had, the stuff that the general public doesn't know is even out there.
Right.
The way these creeps are going out there and doing these things, the sheer perversion that most people don't know is available through a simple Google search or YouTube, and talk about it so that people can learn what's online, what's out there, how they can protect their kids from what's going on out there. And then I ended it with how all of that impacted me. The PTSD that I ended up with from looking at hundreds of thousands of images of children being sexually exploited and abused, the toll that took on me as a father and as a husband and as a person, and some of the steps that I've taken to get back to the acceptable range of crazy that I had lived in before I went into child crimes.
Right.
And
crimes against children.
Right. It was an adventure. And it was one that I wouldn't change for the world, but at the same time, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. No. But is absolutely critical and necessary because it's gotten worse. When I left the sheriff's office from doing crimes against children, the National Center averaged somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300,000 reports per week of child exploitive material being traded online. There was a statistic toward the kind of middle phase of our lockdowns during COVID. It had gone up to about 1 million cases a week. The first week of 2023, January 1st through January 7th, the National Center reported that they had gotten over 4 million reports of child exploitive images being traded online. It has gone down. I think last week's showed about 500 to 600,000 reports, something like that. But it's not getting better.
No, it's not. And that's the thing. Like, I know that the pandemic and the shutdown, it was exponential. But here's the thing. They're back in school. They're back doing their thing. Yet we went from 29 million to 32 million. 2021 to 2022, which tells me it's still climbing.
Right. It's gotten worse because so many people have gotten so used to doing everything online constantly all the time that's the new norm. And we have to change the new norm and we have to increase the security if that level of access is going to be the new norm so that the abuse levels aren't the new norm. And
exactly. And that's really my concern is the child on child crime, the child on child abuse, the child on child, assumption that this is normal. Right. This is what everyone does. And we're in the process of building an app that actually puts the power back into the hands of our kids. And I asked them, I interviewed over 300 teenagers. I would say 5 hadn't already sent a nude to somebody.
Right. And don't realize that there's no way to ever control where that goes or how to, or any way to get it back.
Well, there is no way to get it back. And The piece that you said I'm gonna put up about vicarious trauma. So on your website, I put your website in the chat, and I'll put it up again. Is resources for those that actually do work in this space.
Right. And yeah, there's a number of resources on there for parents, for kids to go on and learn more about internet safety, to contact the National Center if there's a situation going on, or to contact their Internet Crimes Against Children task force in their area. But then there's also the mental wellness side, because I know how it impacted me. I know how it has impacted other people in this field. And you can't deal with that much trauma, that much ugliness without it affecting you.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we're seeing between 2 and 3 times the number of officers every year killing themselves
Mhm.
as are being killed feloniously, because they're dealing with the trauma of law enforcement, and a lot of it is the trauma of dealing with child crimes. And
Yes.
so I want people to know that there are resources out there, not just for law enforcement, for
Mhm.
the interviewers, for the advocates, for the everybody that that takes care of kids or helps with kids or deals with kids, and for the parents, because the kids aren't going to be able to be well after
Mhm.
their traumatic incident if the parents aren't well. And so we want to make sure that there's a holistic approach to everybody being able to take care of each other when these kinds of things happen, in addition to the education side of let's try and prevent these things from happening. Let's
Yes.
reduce the incident rates, and let's try and protect kids so that they're not falling on the desk of somebody like me, for me to have to look at those images and go through that.
Exactly. Exactly. So we just have a couple of minutes left. They put your website back up here. So if there's a parent watching this and maybe they've got a 12-year-old and they just gave them a phone and now they're mortified, right? It's like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that. What are like 3 tips you would give parents to start this conversation? Because you just can't, run out of this video and go, oh my God, give me you're just gonna freak your kids out. You can't do that. So,
Right.
like, what are some 3 just real simple tips that a parent can, the moment they're done watching this video, can be like, okay, I need to go have this dialogue with my child, and I've got question number 1 down.
So open the lines of communication, and it's easy to do by just saying, hey, have you talked to anybody that you don't know in person? Like, has anybody contacted you that you don't know, if you ran into them at the mall or at the grocery store or something like that? And if they say yes, start probing, start asking those questions. Well, how do you know them? Where do you know them from? What is that relationship?
In a
What have you guys,
loving, gentle tone, not a police officer tone.
because that could very well be a situation where, oh, I met this kid at at camp or something like that, and we now talk back and forth online. Okay, what do you talk about? What kinds of things are you talking about? Has anybody asked you to do something that made you feel uncomfortable or you thought might not be
Mm,
right? You can ask in those very simple ways, and then be open to the communication that comes back to you without being judgmental, without freaking out. And then once you've gotten that information, talk to law enforcement if you need to, talk to the National Center if you need to find out, is this something that needs to be addressed further, and let professionals deal with it so that you can stay that good guy and you can stay with those open lines of communication.
right, right. Well, and can you kind of walk through just real briefly? So if I make that call and law enforcement comes out, do they take my kid's phone? Like, what happens? How do they get the evidence? Because we coach the kids and the parents. It's like, do not delete anything. As much as that's your first reaction, do not delete anything. That's evidence that can be used to help save other lives.
We train our deputies to seize all of the devices. That way, we are able to obtain all the information we need forensically, and in a way that's going to be good practice evidentiary, or evident through evidence. And then, if we
A big
can,
word.
yeah, if
It's a
we can
very big
retrieve
word.
these, we will. If we can't, understand that that's unfortunately part of the cost sometimes of giving your kid a $1,400 phone, is they may break it, they may lose it, we may have to take it, but if we can get it back, we will. the important part of it is we get the information to protect your kid from there on out, to protect other kids, and to get that perpetrator so that they're not continuing to victimize people.
So open lines of communication. If there is a concern, you think there's something suspicious, call law enforcement or NCMEC. What's your third tip?
And then finally, just, be open and accepting to kids are going to make mistakes. They're not to blame. The bad guy is. Maintain that loving relationship with them and don't blame them for any mistakes that they've made. Just help them learn from it so that they can make better choices.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So here it is, 9:00. Look at us, Randy.
we need another session. We need more.
I know we need another convo sesh. We can plan that tomorrow while we're sitting in the audience.
That sounds like a plan. That sounds good.
So just thank you so much. First of all, thank you for the work that you did. People are called to this. I get asked all the time, how do you deal with it? I'm like, look, when people share that horrific thing that happened to that child, I might cry and then I get mad and then I get resolved and I'm on the phone or I'm online going, when can I come talk to your kids? When can I come? It just fuels my fire. Right. And there's some emotion in between. Right. But people are called to do this or they're not, period. Right. That you don't just wake up one morning and think I'm going to spend the rest of my, career looking at images that would make most people sick.
Yeah, if you'd have told me when I came out of the academy I'd spend half my career as a 14-year-old girl online, I'd have said you were nuts. But it ended up working out well, and part of me wishes I could still do it. I just for my own. I
think that needs to be a byline for your next book.
So we talked about that. I was going to make an alternative cover for the book, and my wife got really mad at that. I subtitled my book, My Life as a 14-Year-Old Girl. And so, but I've thrown around the idea of making it available on my website as something to sell as a memento.
Yeah. You know what? And I, Randy, you and I both know there are lots of law enforcement officers that do this. I was at the iHattie conference in Tampa last year, and there were 600 law enforcement officers being trained on what to look for, being trained on how to talk to the kids, being trained on how to talk to the parents. And that's a microcosm.
Right.
Of the thousands of law enforcement officers and NGOs and recovery teams and HSI agents and air marshals, right, that are actively looking for predators to take them down and kids that are missing that need to be recovered.
Right. The Dallas conference has had over 5,000 participants last year from all around the world. And that's just a drop in the bucket.
Exactly. So there are thousands of us out there. And so I just really want to thank you for being on with me tonight. I'm sure we'll have more adventurous conversations to be had sometime, maybe later this year. We'll do a part two.
Absolutely.
And I just want to thank everybody for watching this evening. I want to thank, Fran was on, and my friend Joe Lopez, he was on. He does security for Disney. So just thank you for being on. Everybody else that was on that I don't know that you were watching because I couldn't see you. And, as always, there is a war against our children. Our children are being intentionally targeted and groomed to send inappropriate pictures. And we can actually prevent this. I can't solve children's cancer. You can't solve children's cancer. But one conversation at a time can actually save a child's life. We've got resources on our website. We've got our parent toolkit. We've got our safety guide. We have videos on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, on our LinkedIn page. So there are resources everywhere. Randy's got resources on his website. NCMEC's got resources on their website. There are resources, and we get this is an uncomfortable conversation. And I'm going to invite you to take on being uncomfortable and get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because our children's lives are literally at stake. So thank you, Randy, for being with me. Parents, thank you for sticking with us all the way through. And if you pop your kids down in the replay, great. Thank you for educating your young people on this and letting them know, although it's maybe uncomfortable and weird, you care and they matter. You guys have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Jan.